Welcome to Certifying the Future from CertNexus, where emerging technology meets workforce readiness. I'm your host, Scott D'Amico. Today my guest is Charlotte Evans of Coursera. Charlotte works with some of Coursera's largest enterprise customers around the world, helping organizations think through upskilling, reskilling, and the skills that matter most in a rapidly changing market. In this conversation, we explore how AI is reshaping workforce development, why companies need to move beyond basic AI literacy into real workflow application, how learning is becoming more personalized and practice-based, and what growing demand for micro-credentials and skills validation means for both employers and professionals. We also discuss what people should be doing now to stay relevant as human and agent work becomes more connected. Let's dive in. Charlotte, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be on.
Now, my pleasure. So if we can you maybe just share a little bit around your role at Coursera and ultimately the lens through which you look at training and workforce development?
Yeah. So I've been at Coursera for about 7 years now, and had a bit of a journey throughout my time here. I started in the degree side of our business and then moved over into our enterprise side where I work with our customers all around the world. And so I have a bit of a unique global role in that I work with our customers who are some of our largest, most strategic customers in Coursera for Business. So working with companies specifically who are trying to upskill and reskill their people. And I have this kind of unique position in that I'm able to bring out trends that are happening and what we're seeing as best practices to our customers, and then synthesize what I'm hearing out in the field back to our product and data and content teams, which I like. It's this really fast iterative feedback loop. And so much of what's happening in this world of skilling is changing so quickly right now. And as technology is coming into play of how people are learning in the flow of work, it seems like every week I'm learning something new about what these companies are doing. And so that really rapid iteration is a great way to keep my job interesting and fresh every day, which I love.
I would imagine so. And it seems like you're right at the intersection between what are the companies doing, what are we doing, and how do we, in essence, understand each other and make the best of both worlds, which kind of leads nicely into what I wanted to chat about was with all the change going on. And I've been in education and training and workforce development for coming up on 25 years now. I've seen a few big seismic shifts in the space along the way. And if I think about the past 5 or 6 years, we've really seen two big ones. One with how everything changed during COVID with people, the way they were learning, what they were focused on, and now with AI and just the rapid advance in technology. So what are some of the biggest shifts that you're seeing right now with the skills that people are really focused on in light of everything that's going on?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I like to talk to folks about this idea in an improv of yes and, right? If you start with something and you have two people on stage, you don't want to shut down what your partner on stage is saying. Otherwise, the skit is over. So you always say yes and agree with them and tag on something else. And I think we're seeing this kind of yes and approach with skilling as well, right? Right now, in a lot of companies that I'm working with, the yes is Gen AI skilling, right? I think this will be no surprise to anybody at this point, that we've seen this massive growth in demand in Gen AI skilling over the last couple of years. It's, I think, something like 14 enrollments a minute that we're seeing in our Gen AI content right now, a 234% year over year growth in Gen AI skilling based on our job skills report. So that's just been kind of this exponential shift that we're seeing. And I think with that, we're noticing these kind of skills around the periphery that people start to realize they need. With, imagine you're trying to add a Gen AI layer onto your data and you realize you don't have very clean data. All of a sudden, the need to have really strong SQL skills to be able to query your databases, find that messy data, do some data hygiene exercises becomes really important. So we're seeing that as a skill area that's growing. We're also seeing things like natural language processing and some of these core AI and ML skills of it's not always Gen AI that can automate something. There might be a kind of standard AI, ML, NLP kind of thing that allows for people to have other types of automation that come into play. So those skills are important. But then on the non-technical side, we are also seeing skills like critical thinking being really important. I think a lot about, I was recently talking to ChatGPT about my taxes. And it was like, you are going to get a lot of money back. Get ready. And then I filed my taxes with my tax professional, and they were like, so you owe a lot of money. Right. And I went back to ChatGPT and I was like, what happened here? How did it was it the other story? And I told the reasons from the tax professional. It said, oh, yes, well, you didn't tell me about X, Y, and Z. Right. And I think there's often this element in a lot of use cases right now of, oh, you didn't tell me about X, Y, and Z in ChatGPT. And if I'd known this information, then I would have given you a different answer. And for me, it was my own tax liability and bill, right? But I think about that in a financial services company, a healthcare company, right? These highly regulated spaces where if you get an output, just because it's giving you words, doesn't always mean that it's the right words. And so we're seeing this shift toward how do human and agents work together a lot more. And with that, this need to really elevate critical thinking skills.
I love the yes and. I'm a big comedy, big improv fan, so that completely makes sense. The yes and. If I think of it from a visual perspective, it's throwing a pebble into a pond and you see the ripples going out, right? The pebble landing in may be your Gen AI. Then every layer out, there's something else that you need to think about going from the SQL, the programming, the human aspect of it, the regulatory aspect of it, the critical thinking aspect of it. So there's so many things that are definitely tied into that. And so how are companies approaching this, right? They're thinking, okay, great, we need to train our people on AI. We hear so much about that. They're doing AI training. And a lot of the stuff that we're seeing, especially in the news, is AI training isn't maybe always accomplishing the goals that organizations are hoping to. And I think it's probably related to what we just talked about. They're not thinking necessarily about those other rings, so to speak.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was reading a report recently from McKinsey about this, and they were talking about this kind of landscape that we're in right now of a lot of experimentation, but not a huge amount of full saturation and maturization of AI. And so they were noting that there's been this, really up and right kind of hockey stick growth of companies giving people the tools, but these fully scaled environments are not there yet. And they were noticing that I think it was about 39% of companies are seeing that they have an EBIT impact from AI. So less than half are noticing the dollars, right? I think part of what's happening here is that if you're constantly in this land of experimentation, it becomes superficial sometimes in your product, in your services, in your workflows. And I have a lot of respect for engineers who have this real systems thinking mindset, right? They're able to look at patterns, create that matching, and figure out how to take something that feels really complex and make it A, B, C, D, E, right? That's not necessarily a skill that everyone has or has a way of looking at their day to day around, right? And so how can you start to equip a salesperson or a customer success manager or marketing professional to start to have this kind of systems thinking approach to look at their workflows and figure out where could I insert Gen AI into that? Where are there other automations that start to come into play? And so I think that kind of penetration a bit more deeply into workflows still needs to happen before people can start to see that earnings lift or the cost reduction. Otherwise, it's just like tidying up your emails a little bit, right? And making them sound a little more professional and elevated. But I think it's something that people are striving toward. An interesting part of my role, aside from these customer conversations, is I get to stand on stage in different places around the world. And I was in Germany a few weeks ago at a data conference with a room full of chief data and analytics officers, a really fascinating group to be around right now, because I think there's a healthy amount of skepticism around AI with data folks who are worried about what's powering these large language models with company proprietary data, right? And they're definitely feeling, I think, the pressure of this need of, oh, just Gen AI it, right? They might be hearing from their C-suite partners. There's inherent complexity around this, but what it seems to be moving toward is this idea of how can you integrate it into the flow of work? How can we create skilling that happens in the flow of work? And so getting humans more equipped again to collaborate with agents, and think about what are things that are uniquely human, that an agent is uniquely able to do, and that we can do together. And that same McKinsey report was talking about, in that bucket of the middle of what humans and agents do together, our future will be about 72% of those tasks will be done with an agent, which is wild, right? I think about all those like robot movies that I used to watch as a kid, right? How do we work together with an agent? What can you offshore? How can you free up the mental space? The good thing around all of it, though, is I was on another panel in Asia, I don't know, 2 weeks ago. I can't remember where I was at this point, but and some of the panelists that were there were CHROs, chief learning officers, and they were talking about this relief that their companies, their people are feeling all of a sudden to have AI with them, because it allows them to do that more strategic work. So I think when it is implemented in the right way and it gets down to those workflows so that it's suddenly things are crossed off the to-do list of the employees, it does suddenly create this space of, oh, I no longer have to stare at a blank page and come up with a whole complete narrative. I can get the first draft done through ChatGPT and then figure out a way to craft a really human story that's a great storytelling exercise, and do that much more efficiently. And those kind of moments, I think, are really empowering for a lot of people when we get there, but it's hard to get there.
And I imagine it's going to have to bring about a complete rethinking of how organizations train their people. So if you think of historically when training was happening, it was very siloed, but then I think it was also very product specific, so to speak. So I was
Mm-hmm.
going through training on my CRM. I went through
Mm-hmm.
training on how to use Microsoft Excel better. I went through leadership training on my people, on how to best lead my people. But if we think through this lens of Gen AI now, where a tool like a large language model, a GPT type of thing, ultimately is going to touch all the way across every single aspect of the business. So it can no longer simply be, here's how you use this tool, here's how you prompt this tool. It's thinking about how is this going to impact this and what are the downstream implications about this thing that you just did here.
100%. Yeah. And I think we've noticed this kind of two-wave conversation that's happening. We have a team of solution consultants that work with our customers around curating our catalog, right? We have about 18,000 courses on Coursera. CertNexus courses are quite involved in our catalog. And we saw this big push initially around AI literacy. How do you write a good prompt? What is a large language model? Some folks wanted to know what RAG was, right? If they were kind of next level, but it was really this introduction literacy of how is this new thing that's landed on our plates working. The second wave that's now coming is much more toward equipping people with real life use cases and starting to think about more deep mastery of these tools. And I think where that gets complex, twofold. One is you and I are going to be in inherently different places in terms of how we might think about using the content, the new tools, and what our existing knowledge and baseline is, because we have completely different professional histories, right? So certain things might click in different ways. So we can't do a one size fits all training for you and I. Imagine if you extrapolate that out to a company with 100,000 people, that gets really difficult to figure out how to train people to apply to their jobs when you have all these different roles, all these different backgrounds. So I think the benefit of where we are with the technology and what learning companies like Coursera can do now is personalization, right? So before it might have been this monolithic course, like, here it is, go take this training. But now I think there's a world where we're able to learn a lot about a learner, do some quick diagnostics, and be able to personalize those paths for them so that there might be guardrails of what the company wants them to focus on, but they can still kind of progress based on their own knowledge set. The other thing that I think is really interesting right now is practice. People are no longer wanting to kind of sit back in their chair and passively watch a video. They want to get their hands dirty on the keyboard. And it's one thing when you're watching a video, seeing somebody else do it and be like, oh yeah, easy peasy, I could do that, right? It's a whole other thing when you have to actually write the prompt, build the agent, set up the model for RAG, and figure out which data sets you want to upload. And so creating flows where learners can practice. So we have both auto-graded setups with things like Jupyter Notebooks and VS Code, our studio. So for more of the technical audiences, if they want to try those environments, they can, if they're thinking about how might they write a Python script that could help them with some of the automation. On the flip side, we also have these things called dialogues and role plays. So it's all coded off of the context of the course, so the transcripts, the videos, everything, readings, quizzes, whatnot. So it's almost like an extension of the faculty member in the course, but you have to work through some milestones. And the dialogue's very peppy, right? It's like, oh, that's a great start. Tell me more. Which we all know is exactly how a manager conversation goes all the time. So jokes aside, what we realized is we needed to have more personas in there. So the role play is something like if you needed to have a difficult conversation with an employee, or you wanted to convince your chief marketing officer why a new AI tool could help the marketing org, it will kind of poke and prod you in the right ways to get you to think through these use cases. And so I imagine ideation around things like what workflows could we start to put AI tools into. You and I could put in completely different things and get completely different outputs, but we're still anchored around the same rubric from the tool that's nudging us in similar directions. And before Gen AI, building something like that as a learning provider would have been next to impossible, right? I mean, you could have built it for one use case for one person, and that was it. Very difficult to scale. So the agility that comes from that is, I think, really exciting.
Oh, absolutely. And as I think about, you just hit on this idea of learning providers, and Coursera, I know, works with so many content providers, learning organizations, colleges, universities all over the world that are providing content for Coursera learners. So what are you seeing? How are these institutions keeping up and adapting to what employers want now, what learners want now, what's going to work best for the way people are consuming information in this day and age?
I mean, the benefit of working with Coursera, I would say, and any sort of large scale learning provider is the access to data. We have, I think, about 195 million learners on the platform. My mind can't fathom that number sometimes, right? When I really stop and think about it. I used to work at universities in Asia, and I would advise about 50 students, and I would get overwhelmed with that. And so I think about 195 million. I'm like, whoa, that is a lot of people. But with that, we can see these trends really quickly, right, of what's happening, whether it's in a job or an industry sector, regionality. So we able to have this really interesting demographic slice across the board. And we produce a couple of different reports every year, a job skills report and a global skills report that start to look at some of those trends. So within something like a Gen AI skilling area, there's so much that can be encompassed there, right? But we're able to see at that level of detail of things like, okay, content creation with Gen AI, or AI personalization, AI product strategy, LLM applications. Those things are starting to bubble up a lot. We're also able to see where are the ands of the yes and skilling that starts to happen, and what's that regional differentiation. And we pass along a lot of that insight to our content partners, and they have access to these reports as well. And I don't know if you've heard of an organization called Lightcast, but what they do is they have access to millions of job postings. And so they're able to see the connection between role and skill and how that's evolved, right? And 2016 versus today, what a data scientist has to do is fundamentally different. And so expecting content partners, customers, all the different stakeholders we work with at Coursera to stay up to date with that would be a huge ask, right? Why not look at an expert like Cass, who has all of this labor market data? So we've taken their taxonomy. They have about 30,000 skills in their taxonomy, and we ran our large language models against all of the assessments and courses in our platform and did a whole tagging exercise. So there's about 2,600 skills that we tagged at the assessment level. And so that allows us to give this granular data to our partners to say, hey, here's some trends. Here's where, we're really starting to see people are searching for these kinds of things. There's a big gravitation towards this kind of content. These are areas that might make sense to really focus on for training, right? And so there's, I think, a real benefit of having a data-driven approach to these conversations, given that we have a very large N number, right, with 195 million. How do we start to use that data to really provide what learners are after, which is really powerful.
And the skills component to me is one of these critical aspects to think about, because skills ultimately are starting to become the new currency in the job market, where historically it was so much relied upon. Did you have your diploma? Did you have your degree? What institution that you went to? And in some industries, very much still relevant. Other industries have moved away from that quite a bit and are focusing a lot more on skills. So with that, what role are you seeing with credentials and certifications playing? How are learners looking for those and leveraging those as they're trying to advance throughout their career?
Yeah, it's an evolving landscape, I would say. Within the companies that I work with, I think people really love the fact that they can take a course straight from the source, right? From a Google or an IBM or a Microsoft, especially with these large language models, to be able to go to the people that are building them and hear what their recommendations are, that is quick and in the flow of work and really valuable. But we did this micro credentials report in 2025 that has a lot of interesting insight in terms of what students are after, and some stats to maybe throw your way. 96% of employers were seeing micro credentials as a strengthening aspect for a candidate's job application, which is really powerful, right? I think there's a large looming question in a lot of people's minds of how are non-degree credentials being perceived by the market right now. So to see that such an overwhelming response from employers was, yes, this is a positive signal on an application, was, I think, really heartening to see, right? It's a slow, steady progress, but it's really great to see that is viewed as a good thing. And then students are also saying that they see it as really important. They're 88% of students are more likely to enroll in a degree program if they have credit-bearing credentials in them. And 85% of students are also saying that they're going to have greater confidence in their skills with the micro-credential. So if we think about kind of skills as the main currency here, I think there's a real aspect where learners are craving this kind of quick change. I mean, I think about my own career. I was a journalism and East Asian studies double major, which I loved. I was at NYU, and I would get to walk around New York City with my camera on my shoulder. This is dating me showing that this is how I walked around, a camera on my shoulder. Everyone else is like, didn't you just use your phone? No. But and I would be able to suddenly read billboards that I couldn't read before my Chinese class, right? I mean, it was so fun to be able to do that. But my career now is fundamentally different, and there's so many new skills that I had to learn when I started at Coursera, learning about how to drill into data and how to run an API call and all these new things. And I didn't need to go back to school to do that, right? I learned a tremendous amount from my degree programs. But there's this constant evolution, I think, of careers now and the skills that are needed. And so to be able to get this quick infusion and kind of course correction through the content has been really powerful for my own learning. And I think the data is also showing that to be true for both students and employers as well.
And speaking of evolution and things changing,
Mm-hmm.
as we wrap up here, what should employers and professionals be doing today to prepare for what's coming next?
I think it's twofold, right? Whether you're in a technical role or not, I do think it is worthwhile to embrace the realities of these new technologies. So learning how AI will impact your role specifically. I listed some of those skills that we're seeing within the broader bucket of Gen AI that are coming up as key trending skills, but things like content creation or debugging or quality checking, right? All of those things I think will have a specific application that whether you're in HR or learning and development or in a technical role, there might be very specific applications. And so starting to have that system thinking lens toward your work, I think will help a lot. And this is something that this is not just Charlotte advice, right? This is very much, again, what our data is showing that a lot of other people are doing within our global skills report. We had 35.8 million Coursera learners in North America who are really starting to focus in on those Gen AI skills as well. So those are areas that I would say are really important. But again, we are human at the end of the day, right? And I think those human skills are also really important to lean into. And I think back to that McKinsey report that talked about the 72% of the work that will be agent and human working together. And so skills like communication, management, stakeholder engagement, collaboration, how to manage a team of agents. That becomes an interesting one. I was with a client in the Middle East in October, and they were saying our company, our leadership wants to have a 1 to 100 human to agent ratio. So we're taking our workforce of 1,000 and making it 100,000. Isn't that exciting? And I thought, my goodness, yes. But can you imagine suddenly as an individual contributor going from just doing your day job to suddenly needing to orchestrate 100 agents? That's such a fundamentally different way of operating day to day. And I think there's a whole suite of skills involved in that, both technical and durable. And so if this is the future we're progressing toward, there's these incremental steps I think a lot of us can take to be better equipped for that reality. And I think it's coming. So I'm trying to brace myself and get ready for it. And I think a lot of our learners from what we're seeing in the data are doing the same. But it's all possible, right? I think I look at all of this with great optimism and excitement for the future. I think there's a reality. I sit in San Francisco, right? And we see a lot of the layoffs that are happening, and that's scary and tough. And I think there's an initial knee-jerk reaction from a lot of organizations of this is a very quick and easy way to create cost efficiency. But my hope, and I think what some organizations are starting to do as well, is that you can reskill people into new roles and create that kind of revenue lift that comes with that, so long as those people are empowered to continue on their own reskilling journey.
And it's happened throughout history, from the printing press to the assembly line to, if you think about the advent of the internet, the sky is falling, everyone's going to lose their jobs, we're going to have nothing to do. As you mentioned, people focus on reskilling, they continue to grow, maybe go down a different avenue. And I think you said it nicely. If you're that technical person, maybe it is starting to lean into those durable skills. And if you're more on the people side, the leadership side, individual contributor, really start focusing in on what are some of these technical skills that are going to be associated with those different rings around my job. So, Charlotte, thank you so much for joining me. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Scott. It's my pleasure to be here.
Special thanks again to my guest, Charlotte Evans of Coursera. A key takeaway from this conversation is that the organizations and professionals who will be best positioned for what comes next are not the ones simply experimenting with AI at the surface level. They are the ones building real skills, applying them in meaningful ways, and combining technical capability with the human judgment, critical thinking, and adaptability that this next era of work will require. Thanks for listening to Certifying the Future from CertNexus. Be sure to subscribe so you do not miss future episodes. And if you are enjoying the show, please leave a review. It's one of the best ways to help others find the podcast. We'll see you next time on Certifying the Future.